Chapter 20 of the Talisman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Talisman by Sir Walter Scott. Chapter 20. When beauty leads the lion in her toils, such are her charms he dare not raise his mane, far less expand the terror of his fangs. So great Alcides made his club a distaff, and spun to please fair Omphale. Anonymous. Richard, the unsuspicious object of the dark treachery detailed in the closing part of the last chapter, having effected, for the present at least, the triumphant union of the crusading princes, in a resolution to prosecute the war with vigour, had it next at heart to establish tranquillity in his own family, and, now that he could judge more temperately, to inquire distinctly into the circumstances leading to the loss of his banner, and the nature and the extent of the connection betwixt his kinswoman Edith and the banished adventurer from Scotland. Accordingly the Queen and her household were startled with a visit from Sir Thomas de Vaux, requesting the present attendance of the Lady Calista of Montfaucon, the Queen's principal bow-woman, upon King Richard. "What am I to say, madam?" said the trembling attendant to the Queen. "He will slay us all." "Nay, fear not, madam," said De Vaux. "His Majesty hath spared the life of the Scottish knight, who was the chief offender, and bestowed him upon the Moorish physician. He will not be severe upon a lady, though faulty." "Devise some cunning tale, wench," said Berengaria. "My husband hath too little time to make inquiry into the truth." "Tell the tale as it really happened," said Edith, "lest I tell it for thee." "With humble permission of her Majesty," said De Vaux, "I would say Lady Edith adviseth well, for although King Richard is pleased to believe what it pleases your Grace to tell him, yet I doubt his having the same deference for the Lady Calista, and in this especial matter." "The Lord of Gilsland is right," said the Lady Calista, much agitated at the thoughts of the investigation which was to take place. "And besides, if I had presence of mind enough to forge a plausible story, beshrew me if I think I should have the courage to tell it." In this candid humour the Lady Calista was conducted by De Vaux to the King, and made, as she had proposed, a full confession of the decoy by which the unfortunate Knight of the Leopard had been induced to desert his post. Exculpating the Lady Edith, who, she was aware, would not fail to exculpate herself, and laying the full burden on the Queen, her mistress, whose share in the frolic she well knew, would appear the most venial in the eyes of Coeur de Lion. In truth, Richard was a fond, almost uxorious husband. The first burst of his wrath had long since passed away, and he was not disposed severely to censure what could not now be amended. The wily Lady Calista, accustomed from her earliest childhood to fathom the intrigues of a court, and watch the indications of a sovereign's will, hastened back to the Queen with the speed of a lapwing, charged with the King's commands that she should expect a speedy visit from him, to which the bower lady added a commentary founded on her own observation, tending to show that Richard meant just to preserve so much severity as might bring his royal consort to repent of a frolic, and then to extend to her and all concerned his gracious pardon. "Sits the wind in that corner, wench?" said the Queen, much relieved by this intelligence. "Believe me that, great commander as he is, Richard will find it hard to circumvent us in this matter, and that, as the Pyrenean shepherds are wont to say in my native Navarre, many a one comes from wool and goes back shorn." Having possessed herself of all the information which Calista could communicate, the royal Berengaria arrayed herself in a most becoming dress, and awaited with confidence the arrival of the heroic Richard. He arrived, and found himself in the situation of a prince entering an offending province, in the confidence that his business will only be to inflict, rebuke, and receive submission, when he unexpectedly finds it in a state of complete defiance and insurrection. Berengaria well knew the power of her charms and the extent of Richard's affection, and felt assured that she could make her own terms good, now that the first tremendous explosion of his anger had expended itself without mischief. Far from listening to the king's intended rebuke as what the levity of her conduct had justly deserved, she extenuated, nay, defended as a harmless frolic that which she was accused of. She denied, indeed, with many a pretty form of negotiation, that she had directed Nectabanus absolutely to entice the knight farther than the brink of the mount on which he kept watch. And indeed this was so far true, that she had not designed Sir Kenneth to be introduced into her tent. And then, eloquent in urging her own defence, the Queen was far more so impressing upon Richard the charge of unkindness, in refusing her so poor a boon as the life of an unfortunate knight, who, by her thoughtless prank, had been brought within the danger of martial law. She wept and sobbed while she enlarged on her husband's obduracy on this score, as a rigour which had threatened to make her unhappy for life, whenever she should reflect that she had given, unthinkingly, the remote cause for such a tragedy. The vision of this slaughtered victim would have haunted her dreams. Nay, for aught she knew, since such things often happened, his actual spectre might have stood by her waking couch. To all this misery of the mind was she exposed by the severity of one who, while he pretended to dote upon her slightest glance, would not forego one act of poor revenge, though the issue was to render her miserable. All this flow of female eloquence was accompanied with the usual arguments of tears and sighs, and uttered with such tone and action as seemed to show that the Queen's resentment arose neither from pride nor sullenness, but from feelings hurt at finding her consequence with her husband less than she had expected to possess. The good King Richard was considerably embarrassed. He tried in vain with one whose very jealousy of his affection rendered her incapable of listening to argument, nor could he bring himself to use the restraint of lawful authority to a creature so beautiful in the midst of her unreasonable displeasure. He was therefore reduced to the defensive, endeavoured gently to chide her suspicions and soothe her displeasure, and recalled to her mind that she need not look back upon the past with recollections either of remorse or supernatural fear, since Sir Kenneth was alive and well, and had been bestowed by him upon the great Arabian physician, who, doubtless of all men, knew best how to keep him living. But this seemed the unkindest cut of all, and the Queen's sorrow was renewed at the idea of a Saracen, a mediciner, obtaining a boon for which, with bare head and on bended knee, she had petitioned her husband in vain. At this new charge Richard's patience began rather to give way, and he said, in a serious tone of voice, "Berengaria, the physician saved my life. If it is of value in your eyes, you will not grudge him a higher recompense than the only one I could prevail on him to accept." The Queen was satisfied she had urged her coquettish displeasure to the verge of safety. "My Richard," she said, "why brought you not that sage to me, that England's Queen might show how she esteemed him who could save from extinction the lamp of chivalry, the glory of England, and the light of poor Berengaria's life and hope?" In a word, the matrimonial dispute was ended, but, that some penalty might be paid to justice, both King and Queen accorded in laying the whole blame on the aged Nectabanus, who, the Queen being by this time well weary of the poor dwarf's humour, who, with his royal consort Guenevra, sentenced to be banished from the court, and the unlucky dwarf only escaped a supplementary whipping, from the Queen's assurances that he had already sustained personal chastisement. It was decreed further that, as an envoy was shortly to be dispatched to Saladin, acquainting him with the resolution of the council, to resume hostilities as soon as the truce was ended, and as Richard proposed to send a valuable present to the Soldan, in acknowledgment of the high benefit he had derived from the services of El Hakim, the two unhappy creatures should be added to its curiosities, which, from their extremely grotesque appearance and the shattered state of their intellect, were gifts that might well pass between sovereign and sovereign. Richard had that day yet another female